The timeline that broke the internet. There are moments when the internet doesn't just speculate. It stops, rewinds, and starts counting days. This is one of those moments. Because when a woman announces she is 8 weeks pregnant, and her husband has been dead for 10, people don't ask if questions will come. They ask how loud they're going to be. And right now, the questions are deafening. Erika Kirk didn't just share personal news. She detonated a timeline, one that immediately collided with grief, politics, loyalty, and a silence that feels heavier than any denial ever could. What should have been a private chapter instantly became public scrutiny, not because people are heartless, but because the math refuses to stay quiet. 8 weeks pregnant, 10 weeks gone. And suddenly, everyone is asking the same thing, not out loud, but everywhere else. Who is the father? No one wanted to be the first to say it, but everyone thought it. And when denial came fast, firm, and strategic, it didn't calm the storm. It sharpened it. Because this isn't just about a pregnancy. It's about timing, image, power, and what happens when grief and ambition overlap in public view. This story isn't unfolding behind closed doors. It's playing out in interviews, body language, missing wedding rings, and moments people can't unsee. So let's slow this down. Let's walk through it carefully. And let's talk about why so many people believe the truth is already leaking, even if no one has admitted it yet. The moment everything shifted wasn't the pregnancy announcement. It was something Erika said before that. Sitting in an interview, reflecting on her husband's death, she spoke about prayer, about hope, about motherhood, about wishing, even asking God, that she had been pregnant at the time her husband was murdered. To some, it sounded emotional, raw, vulnerable. To others, it sounded unsettling. Because grief has patterns, and people instinctively know when something doesn't align with the moment. She spoke about wanting 4 children, about how women shouldn't delay motherhood, about how careers can wait, about how bobbies should come first. And that's when the internet shifted its weight. Not because of what she said, but when she said it. The reaction was immediate, sharp, unforgiving. People weren't hearing a devastated widow. They were hearing someone reframing tragedy in a way that felt misaligned. Comments flooded in. She's never with the kids she already has. That's a strange thing to pray for after your husband was killed. Most people would pray for justice, or peace, or answers. And once those thoughts were voiced, something broke. Because suddenly, people weren't reacting emotionally, they were reacting logically. And logic doesn't care about sympathy. Logic cares about sequence. The timeline no one can ignore. The speculation didn't come from nowhere. It came from math. When rumors surfaced that Erika was around 8 weeks pregnant, people didn't jump to conclusions. They checked calendars. Charlie had been gone for 10 weeks. That 2-week gap became the loudest silence in the room. No one needed to accuse anyone of anything. The timeline did that on its own. And once the numbers were out there, the internet did what it always does. It connected dots whether permission was given or not. Comments shifted from confusion to prediction. She's marrying him in 2027. Watch. This has been obvious for a while. We all saw it coming. And what made those comments land harder wasn't shade. It was certainty. People weren't speculating anymore. They were speaking like this was already written. And then came the detail that changed the temperature overnight. Vance appeared in public without her wedding ring. That's not gossip, that's visual evidence. In a vacuum, it might mean nothing, but in the middle of a growing scandal, it becomes a symbol, a signal, a question mark that refuses to be ignored. People don't just remove wedding rings casually when everything is fine, especially not when optics matter. And optics matter here more than almost anywhere else. The hug that started everything, coming next. This is where the story circles back to the moment people never forgot. The hug. The one that was replayed, slowed down, analyzed, and debated endlessly. A hug that didn't look inappropriate at first glance, until context wrapped around it. People remember where they were standing, who was present, who was watching. They remember that Usha was there. They remember how long it lasted. They remember how hands were placed. And once the pregnancy rumors surfaced, that hug took on a different weight. Not proof, but implication. And implication is powerful, especially when paired with comments made on stage. Comments about faith, about conversion, about family values, spoken publicly, in front of thousands, about a spouse who didn't fit the image being praised. That moment wasn't playful, it was revealing. And the audience noticed. When denial finally arrived, it wasn't emotional. It was strategic. Because if J.D. Vance had anything to lose, it's everything. A carefully constructed image. A political future being positioned years in advance. A base that does not tolerate hypocrisy. A scandal like this wouldn't just slow momentum, it would erase it. And that's why denial makes sense. Not as proof of innocence, but as self-preservation. Because whether true or not, perception alone can destroy careers. And the most dangerous part of this story is what's been said. It's what hasn't. Because someone, somewhere, is already unraveling. And when the next slip happens, when the next detail leaks, the truth may finally stop hiding behind timelines and start speaking for itself. Every scandal has a moment. Not the accusation. Not the denial. The image. The clip people replay in their heads when something doesn't add up. In this story, that moment was the hug. At the time it happened, it barely registered as controversial. It was quick, public, surrounded by people. The kind of interaction that could easily be dismissed as emotional support between friends navigating an unthinkable loss. But context is everything. And once context arrived, that hug stopped looking neutral. It started looking loaded. People went back to that footage not because it proved anything, but because suddenly it explained too much. The timing, the comfort level, the familiarity that didn't quite match the circumstances. And once the pregnancy timeline entered the conversation, that hug became the visual anchor everyone returned to. Not as evidence, as implication. Because implication doesn't need certainty to be powerful. It just needs plausibility. And that hug had plenty of it. The event that shifted public perception. The turning point event was meant to be symbolic, a show of unity, a gathering rooted in shared values, grief, and political alignment. Cameras were everywhere, the crowd was massive, emotions were high. And right there, in front of thousands, Erika and J.D. Vance shared a moment that instantly stood out once people slowed it down. It wasn't scandalous on the surface, but it was intimate. The kind of intimacy that feels normal only if a bond already exists. People noticed how natural it looked, how unguarded, how neither of them seemed aware they were being watched, which is rare for individuals trained in optics and media control. And then people noticed who was nearby. Usha Vance was present. That detail matters. Because public affection doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in hierarchy, in power structures, and in awareness of who is watching. And when someone with everything to lose lets their guard down in public, it suggests comfort, not impulse. That's what unsettled people. Not the hug itself, but the lack of self-consciousness. Why the hug became a symbol. When the pregnancy rumors started circulating, people didn't search for new footage. They went back. They re-examined old moments with new information. And suddenly, that hug wasn't just emotional support, it was a timestamp. People started asking questions that had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with plausibility. How close were they before this? Why did it look so natural? Why didn't either of them hesitate? And once those questions are asked, they don't disappear just because someone laughs them off in an interview. Which brings us to the response. The MEGYNKELLY interview, damage control or dismissal. When Erika was asked about the hug during her interview, she didn't deny it happened. She minimized it. She laughed. She rolled her eyes. She framed it as her personality, that she's a hugger, that physical affection is normal for her, that people reading into it are projecting. And on paper, that explanation works. Until you factor in timing. Because at that point, the internet wasn't reacting to the hug in isolation anymore. It was reacting to the sequence of events. Grief, public intimacy, pregnancy rumors, political alignment, a missing wedding ring. Laughing it off didn't dissolve suspicion, it reinforced it. Not because humor is wrong, but because it avoided the deeper concern people were actually reacting to. Which wasn't the hug. It was the pattern. The comment that made things worse. If the hug lit the match, the comment poured gasoline. During that same event, JD made a remark that immediately shifted how people interpreted his personal life. He spoke publicly about faith, about Christianity, about hope that his wife would eventually be moved by the same beliefs he was. On its own, that might sound like a man expressing spiritual longing. In context, it sounded like distance. Because he wasn't speaking privately, he was speaking on stage, in front of supporters, framing his wife as someone who didn't fully align with the image being celebrated. And the audience noticed. Especially an audience that places heavy emphasis on family values, religious unity, and public alignment. That moment reframed everything. Suddenly, people weren't just questioning Erika's behavior. They were questioning the state of JD's marriage. And when Usha later appeared without her wedding ring, that question grew teeth. Politics changes everything. This story does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a political machine that rewards image and punishes deviation. JD Vance is not just a public figure, he is being positioned, carefully, strategically, as a future standard-bearer, a next-generation conservative leader, a man whose brand depends on stability, loyalty, and moral consistency. That context is critical, because in politics, perception is reality. And scandals don't need to be proven to be effective, they just need to linger. A rumor involving a pregnancy, a widow, and a timeline that overlaps with a murder doesn't just damage reputations, it detonates them. Which is why denial came quickly. Not emotionally. Professionally. Why denial makes sense, even if nothing happened? This is where the narrative becomes uncomfortable, because denial doesn't automatically mean guilt. It means risk management. If JD had any awareness that speculation could spiral, the smartest move would be immediate distance, firm rejection, clear boundaries. Not because it's true, but because letting the story breathe would be catastrophic. His entire political future hinges on appearing untouched by scandal. One headline, one viral narrative, one unanswered question, and years of positioning evaporate. That's why denial doesn't calm the public. It confirms the stakes. And high stakes suggest something real is being protected, whether that's a relationship, a reputation, or simply control over the narrative. The family angle no one wants to talk about. There's another layer people rarely address openly. Children. If any part of this story were true, even partially, the fallout wouldn't just hit politicians or public figures. It would hit families. Usha, her kids, Erika's children. And that reality adds urgency to every move being made. Because denial isn't just about elections. It's about damage containment. And the more carefully managed the responses become, the more people suspect there's something volatile beneath the surface. Why the story refuses to die. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. If this were nothing, it would already be over. The internet moves fast. Attention spans are short. Outrage cycles burn out quickly. But this hasn't. Because every new detail, no matter how small, keeps reinforcing the same unanswered question. Why does it feel like someone is already unraveling? Why do actions feel reactive instead of resolved? Why does every attempt to dismiss the story only sharpen focus on the timeline again? People aren't waiting for proof anymore. They're waiting for the slip. The moment when someone says too much, or hesitates too long, or lets emotion override discipline. Because that's when truth tends to surface. Not through confessions, but through cracks. By the time denial arrived, the story had already outrun it. Not because anyone had proven anything, but because the narrative had shifted from what happened to why everyone is reacting the way they are. That distinction matters. When people stop chasing confirmation and start analyzing behavior, the ground changes. This is no longer a rumor cycle. It's a pattern recognition exercise, and the pattern doesn't look calm, it looks managed. Which brings us to the detail that hardened suspicion overnight. The ring that spoke louder than words. When Usha Vance appeared publicly without her wedding ring, the reaction wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Because symbols matter when people refuse to speak. A missing ring in the middle of a scandal is never neutral, especially not in political circles where optics are rehearsed, vetted, and approved. This wasn't a casual appearance. It was a high-visibility moment alongside Melania Trump, at a location where messaging and symbolism are tightly controlled. And that's why the ring mattered. If everything were stable behind the scenes, that ring would have been there. Not for romance, for reassurance, for narrative stability, for control. Its absence didn't confirm anything, but it introduced doubt. And doubt is the one thing denial cannot erase. Why denial was inevitable, regardless of truth. At this point, it's critical to be precise. A denial does not equal guilt, but it does reveal risk. From a strategic standpoint, J.D. Vance had no option but to shut the rumor down immediately. Here, why? His public identity is not just personal, it's political capital. He is being framed as a future standard bearer, a disciplined figure, a family man, a successor in waiting. And stories like this don't bruise that image. They obliterate it. An alleged affair tied to a pregnancy, involving a widow whose husband was a close political ally, would not be treated as gossip. It would be treated as hypocrisy. And hypocrisy is unforgivable to the audience he depends on. So denial wasn't emotional. It was operational. A firewall. A way to halt momentum before speculation hardened into headlines. But here, the problem. Denial can stop ACCUS8ONS, not QSDONS. The internet didn't slow down after the denial. It recalibrated. Instead of asking, is this true? People started asking, why does everyone look like they're under pressure? Why does this feel rushed? Why is every response defensive instead of settled? Those are not the questions people ask when a story is dead. They are the questions people ask when something unresolved is happening off camera. Because if nothing were wrong, the tone would be different. There would be calm, consistency, normalcy. Instead, what people see is distance, silence, carefully measured appearances. And that fuels suspicion more than any allegation ever could. The political timing, makes everything worse. This story isn't unfolding during a quiet chapter. It's unfolding during positioning. J.D. Vance is being openly discussed as a future presidential contender, not hypothetically, structurally. Support is being organized, messaging is aligning, surrogates are speaking. Even Turning Point, USA, has been mentioned in connection with future support narratives. That means stakes are elevated. Private problems become public liabilities. And public liabilities don't get handled with truth. They get handled with containment. Which explains the choreography. Swift denial. Tight-lipped appearances. Minimal engagement. No clarifying details. No emotional transparency. This isn't the behavior of people at peace. It's the behavior of people managing fallout. the family dimension no one can control. There is one aspect of this story no political strategy can neutralize. Children. If there is any complexity behind the scenes, emotional, relational, or otherwise, it doesn't stay confined to press cycles. It bleeds into families. That reality alone would justify urgency, silence, distance, containment. And it also explains why no one is pushing harder publicly. Because escalation would hurt people who didn't choose this spotlight. Which means the story will not end with a confession. It will end with either time dulling public interest, or a slip that forces clarity. Those are the only two exits. The question that refuses to disappear. Here is where everything loops back to the beginning. Not to the pregnancy, not to the hug, not to the ring, but to behavior. If J.D. Vance truly has nothing to do with Erika's pregnancy, if there is no hidden relationship, no overlap, no complication, then one question remains unanswered. Why does it feel like someone involved is already unraveling? Why do actions look reactive instead of resolved? Why does every attempt to minimize the story feel like it confirms the stakes instead of dissolving them? Why does silence feel strategic instead of natural? Because truth has a way of stabilizing situations. And this situation looks anything but stable. Final thought, what happens next? This story may not end with proof. It may not end with accountability. It may simply fade. But people will remember the timeline. They will remember the hug. They will remember the missing ring. And they will remember how quickly denial arrived and how little it actually settled. Because when something is truly false, it dies quietly. When something lingers, it's usually because there's more beneath the surface than anyone is ready to admit. And the next time someone slips, says too much, hesitates too long, or breaks discipline, the internet won't be counting weeks anymore. It will be connecting conclusions.